So today we're going over the 3 basic strategies for carb counting and kind of an introduction just to get you started. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to talk about how to carb count. And this is where you're going to be actually tracking your carbohydrates that you're going to eat. And from there we can then calculate your dose of insulin to provide. So one thing with carb counting, it's extremely important to stay as accurate as possible so that you get the most accurate dose of insulin before your meals. So there's 3 tips in carb counting. We did talk about identifying the carbs, but we want to measure out the portions. That's the first one. So I usually do recommend, if you have at home, bring out your measuring cups. These are going to be your serving spoons. And the second one is going to be reading labels or figuring out what the carbohydrate is in that food. So you have a few things. If there's a package item like pasta or rice, or it's a frozen meal, anything, it's going to have a nutrition facts label on it. So with the nutrition facts label, there's a couple of information that you are going to want to look for. The first one is at the top. It's going to say serving size, and this one happens to say 1 cup. So if we had a cup of, say this is, it's not saying what it is. If you had 1 cup, and then you're going to look for total carbohydrates, and the total carbohydrates next to it is going to be all the carbohydrates in that single serving or 1 cup serving that you're going to count. So if you had that 1 cup serving, you would, in this example, would be 22 grams of carbs. So one thing would be, if you had 2 servings of this food, you would double then. So depending on how hungry you are, what you're going to be eating, you're going to be able to go back to this label as a reference and then determine how much you're going to be eating. You're going to then count out how many carbs, or calculating out how many carbs you're going to be consuming. That kind of makes sense? Okay. If it doesn't have a label, it will be something that you would want to look up either on your app, on your smartphone. It could be something like the Calorie King. We do recommend that. Go Meals, MyFitnessPal, some kind of app that's going to give you some information about how many grams of carbs is in that particular food. The other good resource for looking for carbohydrates would be the Calorie King, Calorie, Fat, and Carbohydrate Counter. And these books will have in the green, these are a little hard to see, but in the green section or column would be the amount of carbs, grams of carbs, that you would want to document along with the serving size. So one nice thing with the Calorie King is that it does have all the foods, including food items that don't have a label, like your produce, like a tomato, any of your fruit. Those items can be actually looked up on here and then calculated out how much you're going to have. The third thing that you will want to do is definitely track and write down your carbs. So for a while this may take a little bit of extra time, but from when you're placing food onto your plate, getting ready for a meal, you may want to actually write down what you're consuming, writing down the amounts and then the carbs, and when you're finished with what you want to plate up for that meal, then also calculate that up. That total grams of carbs for that meal or for that snack is something then that you can calculate with your insulin and carb ratio to determine the amount of insulin you're going to provide. Okay? Any questions? Okay. All right. So to summarize what we learned today for the 3 strategies of carb counting basics, the first thing you want to do is make sure you have measuring tools, measuring cups to serve for your foods. The second one would be to also make sure to read the labels to get accurate carbohydrate amounts, or using a reference book or an app such as the Calorie King to look up the food items. And the third one would be to tabulate or calculate out